Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Oh.
So today we are looking at this this really bizarre scene from the 6th century BCE.
Oh, yeah.
It's this picture of a family in their kitchen, and they're baking sweet cakes.
Right.
You know, the kids are out gathering wood, the father is stoking the fire, and the mother is kneading the dough. And it looks like this incredibly wholesome domestic chore, like a family bonding activity.
Totally. It sounds very quaint.
Yeah. But according to the prophet Jeremiah, this baking session is actually an act of cosmic treason. It's a rebellion against the creator of the universe.
Yeah.
Which just begs the question, why?
Right. Why are baked goods treason?
Exactly. So to answer that, we are pulling from a really fascinating academic paper by Marc Bates. It's called The Queen of Heaven and the Architecture of Divine Sovereignty, a canonical, textual, and divine council appraisal.
It is a phenomenal paper.
It really is.
Yeah.
So our mission today, especially for those of you who are undergraduate theology students or, just anyone hungry to understand the biblical text on a much deeper level, our goal is to move past a flat, kind of two-dimensional reading of Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to unpack how this everyday baking ritual sparked a massive divine indictment, what it reveals about the hidden spiritual geography of the Old Testament, and how it basically completely reframes the narrative arc from Genesis all the way to Revelation.
Yeah, it really does change everything. And to really grasp the gravity of a family baking cakes, we have to immerse ourselves in the socio-political climate of 6th century BCE Judah.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the prophet Jeremiah is ministering during the absolute twilight of the Davidic monarchy. The Babylonian Empire is literally at the gates, the exile is imminent, and Judah is in a state of sheer existential panic.
Right.
And in the midst of this crisis, central to Jeremiah's prophetic indictment in chapter 7 and 44, is this widespread, enthusiastic worship of an entity known in Hebrew as Meleketh HaShamayim.
The Queen of Heaven.
Exactly, the Queen of Heaven.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when we hear the word idolatry in a biblical context, I think our modern minds naturally jump to something clandestine.
Oh, sure.
We imagine a fringe cult operating in a dark, secret cave, or some massive, corrupt, state-run temple sacrificing animals.
Yeah, something very institutional or very hidden.
Right. But Jeremiah describes a family-wide project. Mom, dad, the kids in the kitchen making sweet cakes. It feels so deeply normalized.
It was entirely normalized. I mean, it was an organized domestic liturgy integrated directly into the daily rhythm of an Israelite family. And we don't just have to take Jeremiah's word for it either.
Oh, really? We have physical evidence.
So yeah, the archaeological record provides vivid, tangible proof of this. So if you look at the excavations from the royal palace of Mari, which is an ancient Mesopotamian city, they actually found these elaborate ceramic cake molds.
Wow, cake molds.
Yeah, dating all the way back to the 18th century BCE. And these molds were used to stamp sweetened dough with the distinct image of a nude fertility goddess.
So they're like stamping her logo onto the cookies.
That is literally what they were doing, ancient merchandising. And the Akkadian word for these sweet-baked goods was kammanu.
Kammanu, okay.
Right, and if you fast forward to 6th century Judah, in Jeremiah 44, the text explicitly mentions Judean women baking cakes that bear the goddess's image. And the Hebrew word used by the prophet is kawanim.
Oh, wow.
Which is a direct linguistic loanword from that ancient Akkadian term.
That is incredible. So it's the exact same practice carried over centuries.
Exactly. And the source material highlights that it wasn't just the cakes either. Archaeologists have uncovered over 1,000 of these objects called Judean pillar figurines.
Right, the JPFs.
Yeah. These are ceramic female torsos. They're typically whitewashed, featuring exaggerated breasts, and they rest on a solid pillar base.
Okay.
And the really crucial detail here is where they are found.
Right, because they aren't in temples.
No, they aren't excavated from grand monumental temples. They are found in the domestic kitchens, the storage rooms, and the private living quarters of ordinary Israelites from the 10th through the 6th centuries BCE.
That is wild. Over 1,000 of them just hanging out in people's kitchens.
Yeah, it changes our entire understanding of ancient religion. These were personal household talismans. And this syncretism, this blending of Yahweh worship with the worship of neighboring deities, it was incredibly pervasive.
It wasn't just a local fad.
No, it even extended into the Jewish diaspora. Consider the 5th century BCE at Elephantine.
Okay, remind me where Elephantine is.
It was a military outpost on an island in the Nile River in Egypt. We have a cache of Aramaic papyri from the Jewish mercenary soldiers who were stationed there.
Jewish mercenaries in Egypt, right?
Yeah, and the documents reveal that these Jewish soldiers proudly maintained a functioning temple to Yahweh.
Okay, so they are worshiping God.
Right, but they simultaneously worshipped a composite syncretic deity they called Anat-Yahwu.
Anat-Yahwu, oh wow.
Yeah. They literally grafted the name of a fierce Canaanite warrior goddess, Astarte, directly onto the divine name of the God of Israel.
See, this is where I want to push back a little bit on our modern judgment of these ancient people, or at least, play defense attorney for the Judeans for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if this practice was so ubiquitous, so common in their kitchens and in their military outposts, were they really acting out of sheer malicious rebellion?
That's a great question.
Or is it kind of like ancient empiricism? Like they are treating the spiritual realm like a cosmic vending machine. You put the sweet cake in, you get agricultural stability and military protection out. You worship Yahweh, sure, but you also want the crops to grow in a harsh climate, so you hedge your bets.
The Judeans actually articulate that exact pragmatic defense in Jeremiah 44.
They do.
Yeah. When Jeremiah confronts the Judean refugees living in Egypt, telling them they need to abandon the Queen of Heaven, they flatly refuse. They offer a highly empirical theory of their own history.
Oh, this is fascinating. What do they say?
They tell the prophet that they are going to continue burning incense and pouring out drink offerings to the queen because, according to their data, it worked.
Their data?
Yeah, they point out that during the reigns of kings who permitted goddess worship kings like Manasseh, the nation had plenty of food, they were economically well off, and they experienced no military disaster.
So they are looking at their historical ledger and drawing a very direct correlation here. Goddess worship equals societal stability?
Exactly. And conversely, they point to King Josiah. Now, Josiah is famous for instituting sweeping, centralizing, monotheistic reforms.
Wow, a good king.
Right. He violently stripped away the altars to other deities to ensure Judah worshipped Yahweh alone. But what followed in the decades after Josiah's reforms?
Disaster, right?
Extreme political destabilization, a devastating siege, and eventually the total destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. So from the perspective of a traumatized Judean refugee, Josiah's strict monotheism was the variable that caused the disaster. They blamed the loss of the goddess's favor for the ruin of their civilization.
That is a staggering perspective shift. We read Josiah as the hero, but they literally read him as the catalyst for the apocalypse.
Yeah, they thought he ruined everything.
Now, obviously, God and the prophets viewed the causality of the Babylonian exile very differently.
Very differently, yes.
But before we dive into the prophetic response, we have to look at how the text of the Bible itself handles this tension. Because the later scribes actually tried to cover up the queen's title, didn't they?
Yes, and we see a brilliant, albeit slightly scandalous, piece of scribal intervention here.
I love this part.
So, ancient Hebrew was originally written using only consonants. In the consonantal text of Jeremiah, the word for this deity is spelled M-L-K-T-T.
Okay.
The standard everyday noun for queen in biblical Hebrew is Malket. But centuries later, a group of Jewish scholars known as the Masoretes added vowel points to the text to standardize the pronunciation for public reading.
Right, so people knew how to say it out loud.
Exactly. But when they got to the Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah, they deliberately avoided using the vowels for queen.
Sneaky?
Very. Instead, they vocalized the word as Meleket, which derives from a completely different root word meaning work, craft, or business.
So they censored her.
They absolutely censored her.
By shifting the vowels, a literal public reading of the Masoretic text doesn't say Queen of Heaven. It yields the work of heaven or the craft of heaven. They basically neutralized this rival deity by making her sound like generic celestial mechanics.
Right. Textual critics recognize this as a euphemistic protective reading. The scribes were deeply uncomfortable with the idea of a public reader in the synagogue pronouncing the formal royal title of a false goddess.
Right. It feels too validating.
Yeah. And it mirrors a technique used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, where scribes swapped the vowels of Canaanite deities like Baal with the vowels for the Hebrew word boshet, which means shame.
Oh, that is such a burn.
Right. But we are certain that queen was the original prophetic intent. Because when we look at ancient translations that predate the Masoretes, like the Greek Septuagint translation of Jeremiah 44 or Jerome's Latin Vulgate, They explicitly preserved the title as Queen of Heaven.
The ancient audience knew exactly who she was.
I knew exactly who she was. She was this incredibly potent syncretic blend of the Mesopotamian Ishtar and the Canaanite Astarte.
Right.
A powerhouse deity associated with love, war, fertility, and the morning star.
Okay, so we know what they were doing with their cake molds. We know exactly who they were venerating, and we understand the transactional, pragmatic logic they used to justify it.
Yeah.
But to understand why the God of the Bible viewed these kitchen rituals as the ultimate unforgivable betrayal, we have to completely shift our theological paradigm.
We really do.
We have to understand how ancient Israelites actually viewed the unseen world.
Right, and this is where we need to introduce the divine council worldview.
Yes, this is huge.
Scholars like Michael S. Heiser and John H. Walton have done tremendous work demonstrating that we cannot read the Hebrew Bible through the lens of post-Enlightenment rationalism.
We can't just project our modern worldview onto the text.
Exactly. The biblical authors didn't view the world as a material place occasionally visited by a solitary God. They operated within a worldview where Yahweh presided over a bustling heavenly host.
A council.
A council of created, disembodied spiritual beings who actively participated in the governance of the cosmos.
And the Hebrew word used for those beings is Elohim.
Yes.
This was the massive aha moment for me when digging into the source text. Because, in Sunday school, you were taught that Elohim is just a specific, majestic name for the one true God.
Right, like it's his last name or something.
Exactly. But in biblical Hebrew, it's not a unique name. It's a category. It is a spatial descriptor.
That is a perfect way to put it. Elohim denotes any entity that by nature inhabits the disembodied spirit realm as opposed to the embodied human realm.
Okay, so humans are here, Elohim are there.
Right. Now, Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh.
Right, he is unique.
He is uncreated, sovereign, and supreme. But the Old Testament freely applies the term Elohim to the created members of the Celestial Council, to the territorial spirits allotted to govern foreign nations, and even to the disembodied human spirit of the prophet Samuel.
Wait, Samuel is called an Elohim?
Yeah. When the witch of Endor calls up Samuel's spirit in 1 Samuel 28, she screams because she says she sees an Elohim coming up out of the earth.
That is so wild. It is entirely about where you exist, your domain, not necessarily what you are in terms of ultimate attributes like omnipotence.
Exactly.
Okay, so to understand why this spiritual geography makes the cake baking so treasonous, we have to trace the three major cosmic rebellions laid out in the early chapters of Genesis.
We do.
Now, everyone knows the first one. Genesis 3, the serpent, humanity's fall, and the exile from Eden.
Right.
The second rebellion is in Genesis 6, which involves the transgression of the sons of God, often called the Watchers.
Yep.
They descend and intermingle with humanity before the flood. But it's the third rebellion that actually draws the geopolitical map of the Old Testament.
Right, you are talking about the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11.
Yes.
So to understand the theological commentary on the Babel event, we have to look at Deuteronomy 32, specifically verses 8 and 9.
Okay, break that down for us.
At Babel, humanity collectively refused Yahweh's command to spread out and steward the earth, right? They chose instead to build a monument to their own autonomy.
They clump together.
They clumped together. And in response, Yahweh didn't just confuse their languages. According to the worldview preserved in Deuteronomy 32, he essentially decentralized the administration of the nations.
Okay.
He divided humanity and placed the resulting nations under the authority of lesser, created Elohim.
Okay, so it's like a CEO dealing with a massively rebellious global workforce.
Okay, I like this.
The CEO decides to decentralize, delegating all these chaotic regions to middle management.
That captures the administrative shift perfectly.
Yep.
Middle
Yeah.
management. But the tragedy of the biblical narrative is that those middle managers, those lesser Elohim, subsequently rebelled against Yahweh themselves.
Bad middle management.
Very bad. Psalm 82 gives us the courtroom scene for this. These territorial spirits demand worship for themselves, they sow chaos, and they govern the nations unjustly. They essentially become hostile adversarial powers.
Right.
But, and this is crucial, Deuteronomy 32 verse 9 introduces the crux of the entire biblical story. Yahweh disinherited the nations, handing them over to these lesser beings, but he kept Israel as his own direct, sacred inheritance.
Okay, so he starts over.
He started entirely over with one man, Abraham, to build a brand new nation from scratch that would belong solely to him, governed directly by him.
The nations belong to hostile Elohim, and Israel belongs to Yahweh.
Exactly.
Man, When you grasp that geopolitical reality and then you transport yourself back to the kitchens of Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE, the true weight of the prophetic outrage just hits you.
It really does.
Baking sweet cakes for the Queen of Heaven wasn't just a dietary infraction. It wasn't a minor failure to follow a religious rule book. It was cosmic treason.
Absolutely.
By participating in this cult, the Judeans were voluntarily abandoning their unique status as Yahweh's direct inheritance. They were intentionally subjugating themselves to the rebellious territorial powers that govern the disinherited nations.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a theological mutiny. They are inviting hostile Elohim straight into Yahweh's sacred, allotted territory.
Yeah.
And this brings us to Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s concept of the Promise Plan theology, which Bates highlights in the paper.
Okay, the Promise Plan.
Yeah. The Bible isn't a random assortment of moral fables. It is a single, organically unfolding military and redemptive campaign.
A campaign.
A campaign. It begins with the promise in Genesis 3:15 that the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head. It moves through the call of Abraham, the formation of the covenant nation at Mount Sinai, and the establishment of the Davidic throne. And the ultimate goal of this promise plan is to eventually defeat these hostile powers and reclaim the disinherited nations back into Yahweh's family.
And Jeremiah is ministering right in the crosshairs of this conflict.
He is.
And when he watches his people worshiping the Queen of Heaven, he uses this brilliant, devastating special analogy in Jeremiah 2:13.
Oh, the broken cisterns.
Yes. He says the people have committed two great evils. They have forsaken Yahweh, who is the fountain of living waters, and they have hewed out for themselves broken cisterns that can hold no water.
It is such a powerful image.
It really is, especially in the arid climate of the ancient Near East. A cracked plaster cistern in the desert doesn't just mean you go thirsty.
No, it means you die.
It means you die. God is the active fountain with actual life-giving power. The Queen of Heaven, these territorial Elohim, they are created, disinherited entities. They are broken cisterns.
Yeah.
They possess zero actual life-giving power.
And yet, the populace was deeply devoted to them. And because of this obstinate, multi-generational idolatry, Yahweh issues a terrifying judicial sentence in Jeremiah 44.
Right, the hammer drops.
It does. Since the people declared their vows to the Queen of Heaven with their mouths and happily fulfilled them with their hands by baking the cakes, God essentially says, go ahead, confirm and perform your vows.
Oh man, he just gives them over to it.
He surrenders them to the logical endpoint of their spiritual treason, which results in the Babylonian destruction and exile. But, honoring the promise plan, he preserves a faithful remnant through the exile so that the true messianic seed can eventually emerge to reclaim the world.
Okay, so we reach the end of the Old Testament and the sacred space is completely fractured.
It's a mess.
You have hostile entities claiming the territory of the nations, and God's own people have been handed over to their broken cisterns in exile. How does the biblical narrative actually resolve this massive turf war? Like, how does Yahweh get his territory back?
Well, that resolution is the entire purpose of the New Testament. The Gospels portray Jesus's earthly ministry not merely as, a wandering moral philosopher, but as a calculated, aggressive invasion of territory held by these rebellious spiritual powers.
And the specific geography recorded in the Gospels proves this wasn't accidental at all. It was highly tactical.
Unequivocally. Consider the turning point of Jesus' ministry where he makes his most pivotal declaration about the formation of the church.
Right.
He travels to Caesarea Philippi. Now, geographically, this city is situated at the base of Mount Hermon in the ancient region of Bashan.
Okay, and for an ancient reader, Bashan is enemy territory.
It is absolute ground zero. In ancient Near Eastern contexts and Second Temple Jewish literature, particularly the Book of First Enoch, Mount Hermon was the precise location where the rebellious watchers from Genesis 6 descended to corrupt humanity.
Oh, wow. So he goes right to the source.
He goes right to the source. And the region of Bashan was historically steeped in ancient cults associated with Astarte,
The Queen of Heaven.
the very Queen of Heaven we've been discussing. The area even featured a massive cave system that the Greco-Roman world literally called the Gates of Hades, believing it was a portal to the underworld.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah, and it is standing right there on the most heavily fortified spiritual territory of the rebellious Elohim, that Jesus looks at Peter and declares that on this rock he will build his church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it.
He is literally planting a flag in the epicenter of the enemy's kingdom and announcing an offensive campaign.
Yes.
He's saying, I am taking this territory back.
Exactly.
And that campaign culminates at the cross and the event of Pentecost.
Right. The Apostle Paul provides the theological commentary for this in Colossians 2:15. He states that at the cross, Jesus disarmed the territorial rulers and authorities, putting them to open shame and triumphing over them.
Yeah.
Then, in Acts chapter 2 at Pentecost, we witness the exact reversal of the Tower of Babel.
Oh, I love this connection.
At Babel, Yahweh confused the languages to scatter and disinherit the rebellious nations, handing them over to lesser gods. At Pentecost, the Holy Spirit empowers the speech of the disciples to gather those disinherited peoples from every nation back into covenant union with God.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I'm looking through the notes on the source paper, and I realize there's a gap in this narrative.
Okay, what's the gap?
Jesus disarms these territorial spirits at the cross. The nations are being reclaimed. But the Queen of Heaven doesn't just quietly exit the stage. John actually brings her cosmic imagery back in the grand finale of the Bible in Revelation 12. But reading closely, it feels like he's completely subverting her identity.
It is a masterful canonical subversion. John records a highly symbolic vision of a woman in heaven. She's clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and she has a crown of 12 stars on her head. She is pregnant. She's crying out in labor pains, while a great red dragon waits to devour her child. Now, if you are an ancient reader familiar with the Ishtar or Astarte cults, your alarm bells are ringing.
You see a celestial woman adorned with astral bodies, and you immediately think, the Queen of Heaven has returned.
Exactly.
But the paper points out that we had to decode John's symbols using the internal logic of the Old Testament, specifically Genesis 37.
Yes, Joseph's dream.
Right.
In Genesis 37, Joseph dreams that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bow down to him. The sun represents the patriarch Jacob, the moon represents Rachel, and the stars represent his brothers, the tribes of Israel.
So it's Israel.
Therefore, when John sees the celestial woman in Revelation 12, she is definitively not an autonomous pagan goddess. She's not an independent object of religious worship.
Wow, okay.
She represents corporate Israel, the faithful covenant community spanning the centuries, which has been suffering the labor pains of exile and persecution to finally give birth to the messianic seed.
So while Mary is the historical individual mother through whom the incarnation actually happens, the broader narrative arc of Revelation 12, where the woman is persecuted and flees into the wilderness for protection, that demonstrates she represents the corporate people of God.
Exactly. Revelation completely strips the divine feminine of any independent power or deity.
Right.
She doesn't conquer the dragon by her own strength. She isn't receiving cultic worship. Nobody is baking her sweet kammanu cakes or pouring out drink offerings.
She is just a created, vulnerable servant who is entirely protected and sustained by Yahweh.
Yeah, and her male child is the one caught up to God's throne to rule the nations with an iron scepter.
So it establishes, unequivocally, that cosmic sovereignty belongs exclusively to Yahweh and his enthroned Lamb.
Yes.
Which brings us to the canonical conclusion of the entire biblical narrative in Revelation chapters 21 and 22.
The New Jerusalem.
The New Jerusalem descends to a renewed earth. John describes the city as a perfect cube.
Which is not a random architectural detail.
No, the dimensions perfectly match the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple. But in this new cosmic city, John explicitly notes there is no separate physical temple building.
Why is that?
Because the presence of Yahweh and the Lamb permeate the entire space. They are its temple.
Right. And what happens to the nations? The same nations that were scattered and disinherited at Babel, the ones handed over to the lesser Elohim, the ones Jeremiah's contemporaries were trying to appease with sweet cakes.
Right. What happens to them?
Revelation says the kings of the earth bring their glory into the city, and the nations walk by its light. They are fully, finally reclaimed.
The cosmic turf war is over.
It is over. The rebellious powers are deposed, and sacred space is universally restored.
So what does this all mean? For the theology student listening, or for anyone who just wants to take the biblical text seriously, this framework changes absolutely everything.
It really does.
The Bible is not a disjointed collection of moral fables or a flat ledger of ancient rules. It is a unified, progressive, military-style campaign to reclaim sacred space from hostile spiritual forces. Understanding the divine counsel worldview breathes life into the text. It explains why a family baking cakes in their kitchen in Jeremiah was committing cosmic treason.
Right.
It explains why Jesus marched to the base of Mount Hermon to announce his church. It decodes the surreal, swirling imagery of Revelation.
It moves us out of a two-dimensional reading of personal morality.
Yeah.
And it just thrusts us into the vibrant three-dimensional reality of God's promise plan. It proves that Yahweh has been methodically working across millennia to dismantle the rebellious powers and restore unmediated face-to-face fellowship with humanity.
Yeah. And the paper notes that in the very end, in the restored New Jerusalem, glorified humanity resumes its royal priestly vocation as the indestructible imago Dei, the image of God. We are designed to co-reign with the Messiah over a cosmic Eden forever.
It's a beautiful picture.
It is, which leaves me with a final thought I want to offer everyone today.
Sure.
We've spent this entire time dissecting the ancient history of this cosmic turf war. You know, the territorial spirits, the disinherited nations, the victory of the cross. But if the biblical authors truly believed that hostile, rebellious powers influenced ancient nations and ancient empires, what does that mean for the spiritual geography of our modern world?
Oh, it's a great question.
If the principalities and powers weren't just ancient myths, but real entities that animate human systems of power, rebellion, and idolatry, where do we see those broken cisterns operating in our modern cities, our modern institutions, or even our modern homes today?
Yeah.
The ancient Judeans thought they were just baking cakes to survive. What everyday rituals have we normalized today that might actually be submitting to the lesser powers of this world? Something to think about. Keep reading the text closely, keep questioning the flat narratives, and keep looking for the unseen realities behind the history. We will see you on the next deep dive.